You're very welcome to another episode of the Scaling Your Business podcast. For this episode, delighted to be joined by Arjuna Ishaya, a monk and meditation teacher who is on a mission to live a 200% life. Arjuna, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Delighted to have you. Typical fashion of the show is we spend the first couple of minutes kind of getting to know the guest, and then we move into different areas depending on the topic of the podcast, and people can tell a monk and meditation teacher who's on a mission to live a 200% life. People are probably asking, what's a 200% life? But before we get there, you can tell by the accent that you're, or I could assume anyone who's good at accents can tell that you're from New Zealand.
Oh, perfect. Spot on.
You grew up there, I'm guessing. What was life like? I spent a year, and I know this is a bad comparison. It's like comparing England to Ireland. For some people, I don't mind. I was born in England, but I'm going to compare Australia to New Zealand. I spent a year in Australia. I never got to New Zealand. But what was life like growing up in New Zealand? Any favorite standout memories?
I just remember having black, thick feet in the summer, running around bare feet, climbing trees, messing around in rivers. I just remember hot summers and wet winters. Just remember freedom, actually. Yeah.
Amazing. I've never, as I said, I've never been, but I have a couple of friends who live there now, and they say it's very similar when you're driving to west of Ireland. You can almost feel like you're in the countryside of England or the countryside of Ireland at times.
Yeah.
So when you were younger, before we move on, as I said in the introduction, monk, meditation teacher, what did you want to be when you were younger? When you grew up, when you think of like the younger version of yourself, what did you? For me, I wanted to manage a hotel. Never did that.
Yeah. No, I wanted to fly planes.
Okay. And was there a relative that was a pilot?
I have no idea. No, I think I wanted to be in the Air Force, and then my parents pointed out that I probably have to bomb people. And I was like, well, yeah. So
yeah, fair enough. And then you're now living in the UK.
That's right.
What brought you to the UK? I'm assuming it was a romantic partner.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was traveling and teaching meditation, and then I met my wife and decided to stick around. So, yeah.
Awesome. What part of the UK are you in at the moment?
North Yorkshire.
Okay, very nice, very nice.
It is.
So let's jump straight in. On your website, I'm going to read out. If you see my eyes moving to the left or right, it's just because I'm reading something from your website. On your website, it says, I'm a bit allergic to the terms meditation and mindfulness, but they serve a purpose to point you in the general direction of what I teach and practice.
Mm-hmm.
What I and other bright path Ishayas do is so much more than meditation and mindfulness, as you might know it. So rather than me give you a 30-second elevator pitch, because I wouldn't be able to, the mic is yours. What is it that you do?
Well, as I said, mindfulness serves a purpose because it's a beautiful word in terms of being the opposite of mindless.
Nice.
And I find those times, the greatest times in our lives, when we're completely absorbed in what's in front of us. And maybe that's the dishes, maybe it's jumping out of an airplane, maybe it's making love, maybe it's building an app. I don't know. Those times we're completely absorbed is the complete opposite of mindlessness, and that's when we're most alive, most in flow.
So it's all about living in the moment.
Living in the moment, but being filled with presence, losing yourself, losing the small self, losing the doubt and fear, losing the self-violence, self-management, and just stepping into a place of pure living.
So when you're talking, the quote that pops into my head is better to live with the devil you know than you when you don't. So in your honest opinion, how does one balance drive, because I think drive is important, with enjoying and living in the moment?
People tell me this all the time. They say, I don't want to learn to meditate because it means I'll lose my edge. I'll lose my sense of ambition, right? And I see so many people doing things so fast, mindlessly, with most of their attention on some future goal. They're not actually aware of what they're actually doing. They haven't actually broken it down to a step-by-step process. And if they have, they're not following the very step that's in front of them. They're not giving their full energy, attention, and efficiency to what they can do right now. They're so worried about things they can't control or the things that went wrong. They're not actually focused on what they can do here and now.
So when you say that, then makes me think, because I was doing prep for this, obviously, or naturally, and the word happiness came up a number of times throughout my prep. And I said to myself, well, and I have it written down here, well, what to me is happiness? And I've heard a couple of people speak on it, and some definitions are better than others. But for me, the one I like the most is your happiness is equal to the degree of your expectations being met. So in that sense, those people that are living a life of, jumping from one task to the next task, always head driven on, trying to get to somewhere else. It sounds like part of what you're saying is that people need to set more reasonable expectations so that they can live a more enjoying life.
I think, I think that's the part of being a human. I think there's two parts of us. There's the part of us that has huge goals and huge expectations and huge desires, but the part of us that can enjoy what's right here, right now. And I think we tend to come into one or two camps, and there's those of us who are incredibly driven, but so future focused that nothing is good enough.
Yeah.
And then there's a bunch of us who maybe are so content that we have no goals, that anything is good enough. And I think in both extremes, it's not being a true human. For me, that 200, you mentioned 200% of life, that's the full spectrum. It's the complete contentment with the way things are, and yet this wanting to make a difference, wanting to tick some good boxes off along the way.
There's plenty I want to get into here, so essentially just warming up. But can you give me an indication of, if I was from Forbes coming to you saying, Arjuna, we're doing a day in the life interview, can you give me an indication of what a typical day in the life looks like for you?
For me?
Yeah.
Well, it depends if I've got clients or not, but really writing, a bit of marketing, spreading the word, connecting with people, doing podcasts. I love, it's really setting up courses or setting up my next book. That's what I love to do on my perfect day. A bit of time for exercising, lots of time with my family. Yeah.
What type of exercise do you like?
Well, I do a lot of kayaking when I can, whitewater kayaking, or if that all else fails, I've got some kettlebells downstairs. So,
awesome. So 200%, living a life that's 200%. You're the author of one of the books you wrote is 200%, an instruction manual for living fully. What is life at 200%?
Yeah. It's it's the inner. Let me see. It's the outer enjoyment of everything the world has to offer. Good food, good wine, travel, clothes, enjoying everything. And yet an internal sense of satisfaction, fullness, spirit, if you like, for a different word.
Okay. And you're living life at 200%?
Oh, yeah.
I like to hear it. I'm unsure where to go with this next, but one of the things I saw from your website, a blog that you wrote, was around attitude. And we have this thing in part of a company, franchise business called Sandler Training, and one of the things is called the BAT triangle. So think of a triangle: behavior, attitude, and technique. So from reading one of your blogs, it had me think about this behavior, attitude, technique triangle that they teach, the importance of good behavior, attitude, and technique. But focusing on attitude, something you've spoken about in this blog and in many other podcasts that I've listened to you before, I'm a believer that your attitude affects your beliefs. How important is attitude in your own words?
Oh, I think it's everything. I think after mindfulness, it's the choice of how you define life. So many of us let life define us. But correctly chosen, our attitude is how we play the cards that we're delivered.
Yeah.
It's everything. It's everything. It's whether this whole thing is a game, to use the cards analogy, or a trial, a torment. Whether you're shaking your fist at the sky saying, why is this happening to me? Attitude is everything.
I agree. It definitely, and it certainly shapes your behavior as well when you've got a good attitude.
Yeah. I mean, that whole growth mindset comes from a good attitude. The being a victim comes from a bad attitude. The dusting yourself off, learning from your mistakes, going again, making the most of what you have, all of that stems from attitude. And a good attitude stems from mindfulness.
And if you were working, if you were working with a client who had a bad attitude, what would your first step be?
Well, I think it would be a couple of prongs. One would be get them to do a mindfulness meditation practice. And then I would start getting them to see what they're truly in control of and what they're not. People with a bad attitude are often saying, well, I think they think it's that they're in control of much more than they are. And they're looking for the externals to change, whereas they're not really aware of how they can change the internals. So something along those lines.
So taking control of the internal before you worry about the external.
Well, at the same time.
Okay.
But again, that whole 200% really it's not just about the external circumstances or the hand of fate. It's really, again, how we play the cards we've been given. And we can whine and complain about them, or we can go, well, this is what I've got right now. Let's make the most of it.
For sure. A couple of other blogs that I read in your site that popped out to me. One of them was around happiness. The quote that you decided to put at the top of the blog was, the secret of happiness you see is not found in seeking more, but in developing the capacity to enjoy less. I can't remember who that quote came from, but in
Socrates.
Thank you very much. In your own words, what do you believe is the secret to happiness?
Finding out who you really are. Remembering, not losing yourself. So I think it comes back to authenticity, about living truthfully, living a life that means something to you. I think there's so many people out there quietly suffocating, believing they have to do this thing, that they cannot speak or take a step out of line, because then someone will disapprove and they'll. But I think true happiness is being aligned with who you truly are.
If someone was in a position in life where they've got certain opinions, but they feel like they have to suppress them because of their surroundings, I could give you many examples. Mm-hmm. I've got friends that work in corporate companies that they might not be able to act their true self or the version of themselves they want to act at work, or they have certain opinions that they can't stand up for because they might lose their job.
Sure.
For whatever variety of reasons. What would you say to someone in that situation? Because it's not as easy to turn around, and I'm not saying I'm self-employed, but it's not as easy for them to turn around and say, I'd imagine if I had said that to someone like it was in a situation that I just given you an example of, they'd say, I can't just get up and leave because I've got a mortgage to pay. Insert any reason. What would you say to someone in a situation like that, where it isn't as easy for them as it is for perhaps someone else who might have the freedom to go 8, 10, 9 months without any worry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I get it. It's easy to say, but harder to do. But I think so many people, I love reading studies of interviews with people on their deathbeds, and they always say the biggest regret they made was not taking a risk. And I think so many of us, I just don't take enough risks. And I'm not saying throw it all in, but I'm saying if it's suffocating you, if it's compromising you on some deep level, then surely there's a way out. I mean, surely you have to do something different. To me, it has to happen. And even in a lot of these corporate cultures, as they're saying, okay, tell me feedback. I want honest reflection. And yet, is that really the case? Is it really truly welcome? So, yeah, it's not easy. And there's a lot you can just go, well, it doesn't matter. But then there's a point where you go, actually, this is starting to matter to me. And can I change it, or do I have to get up and leave somehow?
Yeah, certainly difficult for some people, because it means they might have to live for a period of time with the disapproval of their loved ones.
Oh, yeah. And that, and people are stuck in the same thing. Relationships where they're not willing to have difficult conversations or make slightly difficult decisions, because, as you said in the beginning, the better the devil you know than, or maybe the angel you don't. There are so many people not really getting clear on exactly what they want and taking steps, even little baby steps towards that. And that's deeply uncomfortable. And I get that. I understand that a lot. But living a life well lived is an uncomfortable thing. It does involve stretching yourself into zones of uncertainty and the unknown.
How big of a role do you think, and this is going to take a minute or two to get out of my mouth, do you think that social media plays in someone's happiness? And the reason why I said a minute or two to get out was because I was listening to an interview earlier on. I can't remember the guy's name. I'll leave a link to his site below. But he had said that he interviewed 250 of the top kind of experts in terms of programming and attention, and the words I got from head. It's 8:30 here. It's a long day, but essentially, how the social media companies have, the main objective is to keep you on their apps or site for as long as possible. And he gave a great example of one thing that would be a nice feature for social media sites to have is, think of Facebook when I take out my phone, is to see what friends are nearby. So that I could go, oh, Bob's nearby in a coffee shop. I'll go over to Bob and have a cup of coffee with him, and we'll chat and have a good conversation. Very simple for a platform like Facebook to introduce something like that, but they're not going to, because when myself and Bob meet up, we're talking face to face and we're not on our phones. And Facebook and those make money when we're on our phones.
Yeah.
The more time we spend on our phones, we see, perhaps if you're on Instagram, the 1% of someone's life that they decide to share with you, but not the other 99%. You're comparing their 1% to your 100%, and you're not necessarily happy. Do you think it has had a negative impact on some people's lives? And if so, what do you think people could do? One thing I've done that's been tremendous in the last probably 18 months ago, I did it, was I went into the settings on my phone and I turned off all notifications so that if someone tries to hit me up on Instagram, DM, Twitter, anything, it does not come up my phone. Doesn't mean I won't see it. It means that I've selected a time throughout the day where I'll take up my phone and I'll go in and have a look then. But I don't get buzzed. Like throughout this interview, my phone will not buzz because no notifications come on.
Yeah. Oh, I do exactly the same. I pick a time and a place where I go in and choose when I interact, because if I'm with my kids, I can't do both. I just can't. I've tried. I'm completely. If I'm working on something, it can't be buzzing all the time. I just totally distracted. And so yeah, I do exactly the same. But I think the science is starting to show that people are less happy, more insecure, more anxious when they do spend time mindlessly scrolling. And it's just looking for that little hit, that little funny, or that little boost of dopamine, or whatever the chemical is. And yeah, it's endless.
There's a couple of words that when I put in titles, they tend to perform not as well as other words, or sessions that I run. For example, a sales leader recently said to me, anytime he includes the word accountability in something, the view rate drops by 80%.
Huh.
For me, anytime I include the word storytelling, the video or blog just completely flops. For you, in your world, what's a topic that you wish people held in higher regard?
That's a very good question. I think it would be just remembering to put the to-do list second.
To-do list second.
Yeah, and what I mean by that is that we carry this to-do list. We carry yesterday's to-do list. We carry tomorrow's. We carry events in our heads, and yet what I want people to recognize, it's not so much what we do, but how we do it. Right? And what I mean by that is you can do something, you can say the right words, but if you're mindlessly just wrote, someone else writ them, if they're not coming truly from you, then they're empty. And people know that. If it all comes from presence, I think it was Maya Angelou who said, people will always forget what you said. They will always forget what you did, but they will never forget the way that you made them feel. And that feeling comes from being centered in yourself and who you are and how you do things. And that's what I mean by the to-do list second. When you're coming from true presence, from a good how and who, what you do is so much better, so much more powerful, so much more impactful, so much more meaningful. And that is the message I wish people to remember. Because we're all about volume, but it's this narrow band, tiny depth. And for me, I want life to be deep and full and rich. And you only get that by drilling a few very deep wells. But you make an impact. People remember you for that, not for being shallow, but for being deep.
So people remember how you make them feel. I love that quote. I've heard that a number of times, and it has stood out to me. If I had to give a list of my 10 favorite quotes, it probably would squeeze into one of those 10 quotes. One of the questions I like to end all conversations with, and no different for you, and we'll get to where people can find more and all that about you in a moment, is if you were given a magic wand and you could add a new subject to the school curriculum, what subject would you add and why?
I would it would all be wrapped up around mastering the mind, learning the difference, learning to drive your mind and your emotions better.
And why?
People just through no fault of their own, they just get stuck in this washing machine of negative thinking or negative emotion, and then they have no way of getting out. And in reality, it's a very short leap. It's a completely different experience, even taking half a foot step back, seeing it all from outside the glass rather than being knocked around inside. So I think it comes back to that to-do list thing. I think we're taught a lot of important and not so important technical, physical skills, but not any understanding of how to be while we do those things or while we think about these things.
Interesting. Arjuna, it's been great having you as a guest today. I'll leave links to your website, your LinkedIn, your Instagram, and your YouTube is what I discovered. If there's any other events coming up that you'd like me to post a link in or you want to give a shout out to, now's the opportunity.
No, thank you. I love this. You ask great questions. So it's been brilliant. Thank you.